Protesters have been arrested in Kenya in ongoing protests against proposed tax hikes in a finance bill. Now, last month, President William Ruto defended the proposed taxes, saying the country must be financially self-sustaining. Legislators have started debating the bill, with a vote scheduled for Monday. Other levies that had prompted debate and have been amended include a proposed 2.5% motor vehicle annual tax set to be placed on insurance. Civil society groups say that demonstrators and a planned sit-down outside Parliament buildings will continue despite these 200 arrests. Now, Dr. Jason Musyoka is a development economist and he is the Frontline Group CEO. He joins us this afternoon. Dr. Musyoka, it's great to talk to you. Thanks for coming on. Can you give us some clarity around just exactly what these tax hikes entail? I've outlined at least one of them with this motor vehicle, I think it's a vehicle annual tax, 2.5% tax. But what else is there on the table here, which will obviously impact consumers?
Thanks, Michelle. So I think the context of it is that this is an annual bill or process that is undertaken, and the intention is to try and improve on revenue collection. Kenya has been struggling in terms of revenue collection. At the moment, the revenue deficit going up to just about 5.7%. And the current administration has been trying to minimize that to the extent possible. I have to indicate that it compares, if we compare with South Africa's revenue deficit is about 5%. So if we compare both countries, then Kenya is slightly higher in terms of the deficit. Now, with that, there has been measures that the current administration has been taking to try and improve on revenue collection. Last year, the finance bill that was tabled, there was an introduction of housing levy, which did create some tensions, but not to the current scale. The current one is much more reaching. And as you rightly indicated, it touches on both middle income earners as well as low income earners. And the middle income, of course, the motor vehicle tax annual, in addition to a raft of other kinds of taxes that relate to motor vehicles. But we also have, more importantly, the bread and butter issues, which is taxing of bread, which in most countries it's zero rated because it really is the basic need in terms of nutrition. So there is bread, there is vegetable oil that is also proposed to, or it was proposed to being taxed, and others, including sanitary towels, diapers, and really bread and butter issues. And I think with that, the public really felt that it was the final nail on the coffin in terms of the pressure of these taxes on the public.
Yeah, so are you saying that's sort of not a positive, but an upside to the story, that the government has conceded to scrapping some provisions in the draft law, including the taxes that you've just mentioned on bread, cooking oil, sanitary towels, and the like? That's a win, is it?
Right. So from that point of view, there has been, of course, it was a reaction to the public outcry. And yes, the government made concessions on those and scrapped those off. But that was as of 2 days ago. What we've seen now, yesterday and today, is much more demand rising from the public. And in fact, the call today across the country is that the whole finance bill need to be scrapped altogether. Right. The interesting thing, Michelle, is that it does, although there are some of those provisions that have been removed from the basics, some of them have been shifted, for example, to fuel hiking. So if you hike fuel costs, and in Kenya, considering that public transport is much more popular than private transport, you really are just robbing Peter to pay Paul. And the public is aware that even though some of those provisions have been removed, they will have to pay for them via other avenues like increasing fuel or transportation costs. And those are some of the concerns that civil society and the public are raising. And of course, one very interesting factor, Michelle, is that you have Generation Z, the young population that has really been on the forefront, as very different from what we've seen previously, where we have the more working class and others. But this is the younger generation in colleges, in schools, that have really driven this process of public protest. So that's a key factor that the government will see how to navigate. But we are yet to see how they are going to respond now with a new demand to scrap off the whole finance bill altogether.
And it's not just hikes on goods, right? It's hikes on goods and services. I see income from digital marketplaces, digital content will also be taxed under this bill.
Indeed. So the digital content particularly, so previously it was still taxed. What we've seen now under the current finance bill was expansion of the definition of what a digital market would look like. And that now expands, or at least the proposal that was made, it expands to include internet services and computers and so on. It has to be indicated here that Kenya is largely, the service industry is huge, it's big. And with that, we've also seen e-commerce as a major contributor to the GDP. So there is that expanding space of e-commerce. But I think the key issue here is the drastic measure. My view is that as much as government might be justified to try and cover some of these e-commerce spaces that were not covered under the previous bills, the challenge is the speed and the scale in which it is going after these kinds of spaces. I think there needs to be perhaps a more measured approach on how these spaces are covered, and perhaps progressive, and not really to go big when the cost of living is quite high.
Certainly, and taking into consideration the number of people in Kenya living in poverty.
Indeed, the country, I think you're looking at upwards of 40% and more than 16% of the population that live under the international poverty line, which at the moment is, I think, about just above $3. So the levels of poverty are high. In terms of the overall cost of living, if you look at the cost of living index, South Africa still has slightly higher than Kenya. But when you segregate that, or do you disaggregate that into the micro details, the cost of groceries in Kenya is much higher, 2.8% higher than they are in South Africa. And that's the space where the ordinary citizen really is, and the working class and the poor, where groceries are really difficult to afford in a country that is, supposed to be doing much better. So with that, therefore, you could argue that even though South Africa's cost of living is a little bit higher, but for groceries that touches on the poor and the working class, the pressure is therefore higher, and therefore the upsurge of the groundswell that you see, where people are really resisting, any further measures that might make life a little bit more harder than it currently is.
Protesters say they want the bill to be rejected, not edited. How do you see this playing out?
I don't see that. I don't think the government will concede to that. There is public debate that is going on. And of course, there are political issues. There are two things that I suppose that we need to separate. The first is the fact that you do have the legitimate arguments that are being made. And I think that's quite clear from the public across the board. But there are also politics playing out, and with the opposition party taking advantage of this. I don't think that they will concede fully. I think they need to sieve and see how this is balanced out. But I also have to indicate, I think if the intention is to try and improve on revenue, the government will also need to persuade the public that we improve on how the revenue is spent. It goes without saying that there's a lot of leakages and wastage. And if that is sorted out, then my view or argument would be to perhaps look at increasing the ways of collecting revenue and expanding it, but again, on scale and not in a drastic measure that it currently is doing. So I see perhaps more concessions being made, but I certainly don't see the bill being scrapped off altogether.
Dr. Jason Musyoka, let me thank you for your time this afternoon, giving us the latest on the situation unfolding in Kenya. 200 protesters arrested following a whole raft of proposed tax hikes in a finance bill. Dr. Musyoka is a development economist and the CEO of the Frontline Group.